And designers and whatnot, we're often given the task of trying to portray something that has centuries, millennia of wear and tear, accumulation buildup, water damage, you name it. And it's obviously we don't have 800 years to wait around for some of these props to come to life. Sometimes we're lucky enough to have a day. And it's these quick methods through abrasion, through painting techniques that we're using to pretty much just exponentially speed up that process. Most of the wear and tear that we see in the world, be it rust, be it water damage. It's just essentially either just simple forms of buildup or simple forms of friction. It's just very low amounts of friction applied over years and years and years and years. And we've got all sorts of different tools, techniques, and whatnot to speed it up so you can get crazy clothing that's essentially in pristine condition and make it look like it's been out in the wilderness, rubbed on through decades worth of time. Pieces of plastic that look like aged oxidized metal, EVA foam work that's been through various kind of space battles, other types of impact damage, dust, things just sitting around, and it's a lot simpler than it could be seen, and we've got a lot of new modern tools that we can go ahead and apply that, especially some of the newer chemicals, and it's just a means of expediting that process, and a lot of old school techniques that we still use because they're just tried and true, and there's a reason why they work. So usually what I'll start out with is I'll try to build the story in my head. What kind of things has this item that I'm trying to age and bring to life seen? What kind of environment is it? What kind of weapons are affecting it? What kind of damage is it going through? And all these kind of little details help me make the decisions on the type of colors that I'm going to use, the type of materials that I'm going to use, any kind of battle damage and things like that I want to apply, even if it's like just a basic home environment. Somebody that just pays no heed to their environment, doesn't have spatial awareness, and just aggressively gets out of their chair all the time, smashing it against the wall, dinging up the chair rails or whatever. It's little details like that really help to sell your production pieces, especially for hero props on screen. I know for the theater background, we need to exaggerate these things a little more just so they're seen from that distance, but it still makes a big visual impact with a lot of the subtleties that we're able to apply versus just throwing some rocks to create some impact or just doing black washes versus subtle details to create additional shadow and things like that. Any questions really quick? And if you guys have any questions during the presentation at all, please don't hesitate to ask. I want to make sure that if you guys have any ideas that you can get your thoughts across, and my chaotic ADHD brain will often just put that thought to the wayside if I don't try to ask it as soon as possible. So don't feel bad about interrupting. I'll do my best to keep myself on track. And if there are any questions that you're more comfortable asking in a less public venue, I've got all my contact information. We'll get it at the end. And feel free to shoot an email or grab me in the hallway or whatever. So enjoy talking shop, and we're all here to learn. So with the environments, there's a lot of easy ways to kind of show some very quick differences. If you're going through more of like a rural environment or forest, fantasy, things like that, just kind of think about what's around you. In your desert, you've got your sand, you've got dirts, you've got dust, a lot of tan tones, more grays. Forest environments, we're rubbing up against plants. So we've got greens, we've got our mosses. Sometimes, depending on the plant, you've got more colorful mosses. You've got bark. All of that stuff will affect how damage naturally occurs and how the props and costumes will look if they're in that environment, and especially dependent on how long they're in that environment. I've got a couple things that I'll pass around in a minute just to give you guys some visuals. And then on the other side of the world, if we're doing more industrial environments, let's say post-apocalyptic, sci-fi, spacefaring things, we'll do a lot of colder tones. Still are grays and whatnot, but more of a blue-violet hue to it versus like some of the browns and reds that you can mix in. We'll have a lot of colder whites versus warm whites. We'll have deep, dark blacks. And all of that really can give some stark contrast to factions, to environments, things like that. Probably one of the easiest examples that I'd like to hope that most people are familiar with is the Star Wars universe. We've got our Rebel faction, our Jedi. They're kind of stuck in the outer rim, backwater planets. Places like Tatooine are dusty, desert, barren. So you've got stuff that's covered in dust. You've got things that are a little more war-torn, a lot more saturated colors. And then you've got the Imperial side, very clean, crisp, very vibrant, cold whites, very cold blacks. All of their lighting is either like very cool whites or borderline blues. And then you've got like your very just vibrant reds, very visually stark differences, and it's easy to tell that these people are stuck on planets, where they're going, or they're in these pristine militaristic spaceships, more of that kind of fascist regime that kind of cracks down on their visuals, their presentation, extreme levels, and it's very visually impactful with those two differences to see who's the good guy, who's the bad guy, where do these folks come from, and so on. And with a lot more of those colder tones as well, you can do things to kind of emulate the more kind of like grungy, post-apocalyptic environment and kind of combine the two. We'll get some of our warmer tone aspects and like some oily grimes and dust and things like that with some of so let's say Fallout, for example, if you guys are either familiar with the game series or the new show. It's a nice kind of amalgamation of both because you've got that crazy dirt, war-torn, nuclear fallout, but then you've still got kind of these crisp, grimy 40s, 50s industrial weird robots and oil and refineries and things like that, and just different means to build up and go from there. I'm going to pass these two guys around really quick. Will I get feedback if I jump off the stage? I guess we'll find out. Should be okay. Boop. So those two pieces are both Star Wars, both from Mandalorian armor. Just from a material background, those are both 3D printed with extrusion-based plastics, PETG, if we're getting specific. And you can kind of see some differences between the two. The blue knee pad that's going around has a little more warm tones in combination with like some scuff marks and whatnot, where the thigh pad is mostly more cold tones with a little bit of like the metal and like some of the remnants of the fact that he was kind of running around on the planet. So just for like lore background, the knee guard was first kind of shown when he was more playing bounty hunter guy. He was on the planet, he was bouncing around from like these desert areas and whatnot. It's something that he's had a lot longer. It's something that has been through space battle, it's been through mud, it's been through cave dwelling, things like that. The thigh plate was salvaged from an Imperial robot. So it's got a lot more of those cold tones. It's a little bit planet worn, so you might see some subtle browns in there, some umbers. But for the most part, it's just a mass manufactured Imperial asset that was given more of that gunmetal property to it that was just kind of worn and just beat the hell over time. And even with just bones and things like that, it's some really just easy ways to figure out where they're going. Again, like even if it's the same dang skull, if it's in a forest, we're going to get more of that dirt buildup. If it's something like, say, somebody got killed in a refinery, like waste realm, we're going to have a lot more of those like colder grays, grimy, oily look to it. So it's just it's a fun little way to add a lot of just detail to kind of get some fun thoughts out of the brain. And as professionals and artists, it's also these little details that can make you a more valuable asset to the production team because it just brings more life and more value to the items that you're trying to create for the film, be it hero props, background stuff, whatever. So as I kind of mentioned earlier, in addition to the environment, we want to kind of think about where it's at, how it's getting used. If this is something that's getting just stashed away for storage, if this is, say you're a soldier in an imperial capital, if we're looking at like sheaths or holsters, weapons and things like that, as a soldier, you're trained to kind of keep those stuff pretty meticulous, but no matter what it is, we've got our items sitting in here on our hip, and like if you're looking at a sword or whatnot, maybe you're continually resting your hand on the pommel, so there's going to be some just light wear and tear, possibly more smoothness right up there. If it's made of leather, it's going to wear differently because it's rubbing against your leg, or maybe you've got leg armor that you're sitting on. Just if you're casually walking around, maybe the character's a little more clumsy. So if he's hitting corners, he's going to start bouncing things off of tables, off of shelves. And all of that is going to continually affect how that prop is going to look, how the costume is going to look. If you're on the other side with set design, if you got some idiot that's kind of just continually bumping into stuff, that's going to affect how the set's going to portray itself. It's maybe you've got a weird alchemist that usually keeps his stuff clean, but maybe he set a part of the table on fire. So you can use a lot of those methods and some of the tools we'll be talking about to emulate char marks and how that stuff is going to crack and crackle and build up. Let's say, are most of you guys familiar with Legend of Zelda franchise, video game, 90s bad TV show, that kind of stuff? So there's this, just a quick background, the lore is this kind of reoccurring reincarnating hero of Hyrule, and there's this regular weapon set that kind of gets lost over time and he has to go find it and whatnot. But it's kind of like a very cool, like Arthurian Sword of the Stone kind of look whenever he bounces it around. So you've got this really ornate, regal-looking sword with some nice blues and gems in it that's embedded itself in this stone. And sometimes it's sitting there for hundreds of thousands of years. So you're going to get plant buildup. You're going to get moss, some dirts, possibly some rust and oxidation on the blade. You're going to get dirt and grime that kind of find itself into the creases and cracks and whatnot. And depending on the environment, if it's wood or if it's a more open area, possibly you start getting wind damage with like blowing sand and things like that. So all that will kind of affect how you want to put all this stuff together and bring those items to life. And we can start layering a lot of these techniques with some of the paint washes that we'll talk about, some of the abrasion techniques, even gluing and applying things like various green mosses. Maybe there's some fungus buildup. The new Last of Us show, if you guys watched that at all, had some great examples of that, of just 20, 30 years of time passing with the environment getting taken over by plants, getting taken over by these zombies, just being dormant to what we'd consider regular human activity. We saw it 2 years ago with the world shut down as well. Just there was no activity, so a lot of the plant life kind of got ignored. Environmental factors with animals coming more into the city and whatnot, especially for like set deck and things like that. Time passage, you're gonna get possibly things like fecal matter and different organic waste that normally wouldn't be in a city environment. So it's all kind of fun things to think about with that. And it's going to apply into how we use some of our paints, how we're going to do abrasion, all sorts of stuff. So we've got our story in place. We've got kind of the general idea of what we're bringing to life, what it's been doing, who's it been hanging out with, and the next step is to actually do it. So the first thing, depending on the medium that we're going to work with, I'm just going to go over some just basic surface preparation techniques, depending on the material or the medium. I'll just go left to right. So soft goods, pretty much, it's going to be the simplest of the prep work. If it's a new item, you want to make sure that it's clean. You want to wash it, just kind of like if you're doing any dip dyeing, any fabric manipulation, things like that. There can be some other chemicals on there or starching agents that can affect how the paint is going to adhere and how well it's going to bond. And even if it's thrifted stuff, it's been washed before, but you don't know who's touched that in the thrift store, so you probably just want to wash it anyway. And once that's good and dry, then we can go through and do all of our paint additions, all of our abrasions, things like that. Kind of be mindful of some of the fabric softeners and some of the crazy detergents, because sometimes they can kind of cause some issues with just adhesion and property bonding. But most of the time, especially for fabric stuff, it's just a fibrous enough material, be it organic or synthetic, that a lot of the paints and everything won't have any issue sticking to it. For found items, let's say old school kit bashing. If you're not familiar with the term kit bashing, it's taking existing things and modify it, model parts, putting stuff together. Very similar to that, just to make sure everything's clean. I'll usually wipe more of my hard surface items down with 70% isopropyl alcohol. higher percentages can sometimes be a little too abrasive, so you'll get some of these older chrome-plated parts that sometimes that 90 to 99% alcohol can strip off. If you want it, that's great. Then you can use it. But if you're looking to maintain that and just kind of layer things on top of it, it's just be a little more cautious. Maybe do some surface tests or something that either you got a spare part or something that's typically not going to be in the shot or on stage to just do all those material tests with. Same things with all the textile goods as well. It's always better practice to just kind of test any material, any new medium, especially if it's something that you haven't worked with before, just to make sure that it doesn't completely destroy everything that we're trying to do in sometimes perceivably unattainable timelines. For 3D printed stuff, or even other hard surface models, the 3D printing technology is going to come into play. I'll just kind of run through my basic process with materials really quick, and just to give you a little insight of what I do between the 3D printed parts that I passed around to some more of the resin printed stuff. So like I mentioned earlier, those two armor pieces that were around were both extrusion or filament printed in PETG. These guys are resin printed in an MSLA resin. The pistol is a combination of resin print, CNC'd aluminum, and wood. And this guy is just another filament print. For those of you who aren't familiar with different kind of 3D printing tech, the filament is essentially the one that's been most accessible for a while. It's essentially a glue gun on a mechanism that just poops out plastic and layers it and layers it and layers it. More often than not, you'll get what's referred to as layer lines, so it's very visible plastic stacking. So our goal is to make it look as real as possible, so we won't want stuff that looks 3D printed. Very similar to the resin stuff, MSLA, it gives us a much easier processing and prep material to work with. The materials are a little more expensive and they can be a little less durable, so it's kind of pros and cons. A lot of the MSLA printers can print a lot faster as well from a larger scale, just due to the technique on how they work. So for both of those guys, I'll typically do a rough pass of 80 grit just to knock everything down. If there's any kind of crazy filling or things that I need to do, I'll use a 2-part Evercoat body filler, which we'll talk about later. After that, I'll hit it with 150 grit. Then I will use a urethane-based catalyzed primer by a company called U-Pull. It's very high build, dries really quick, super durable, and it's a little flexible. And if you've got a heat cabinet, especially with our timelines, you can spray it and sand it in 20 minutes, which is great. Once I do that for things like metallics and whatnot, I'll possibly just do another dry sand pass at 240 grit, and then I'll do what's called wet sanding. And as it sounds, you're getting your sandpaper wet. What this does is gives a little lubricant just to help kind of whisk away all that particulate that you're stirring up, and it gives you a much smoother process. I also add a little bit of dish soap in there to create a little more surface tension, and it helps accumulate all that kind of particulate. Take that to 400 grit, then I'll do flat black automotive gloss coat for my metallics. The automotive gloss coat versus just going straight black gives you a little bit more of surface leveling properties. Also, with a lot of the chrome paints and the industry grade metallics, they're a little bit translucent. So having that little bit of space between your base before your next paint application goes on gives you a little more depth, and it gives you a little more brilliance in addition to the surface leveling stuff, so you are able to achieve a much more realistic metallic finish. After that, then I seal it again, and Then anything that has additional color on it, like that knee guard, I'll just sand to 600 grit because it's not getting that gloss clear coat application, and call it a day. Easy peasy, right? Nothing crazy. So once we've got our prep done, I'll rewind a little bit as we get to some of the different damage techniques. And talk about how you can add and achieve some of like this nice physical damage, this pitting and things like that. You can carve in like some of these fun bone textures, all sorts of craziness. One other material that I'll touch on is this will apply to our EVA foams, any polyurethane rubbers, expanding foams, things like that. For EVA stuff, if you guys aren't familiar with EVA foam, it's just a nice closed cell foam, a little higher density to like the old school L200, L400 foams, a little easier to work. It kind of heat forms and shapes a little bit better. I use a sprayable neoprene rubber called Creature Cast that was originally developed for dwell casting masks and things like that. You can go ahead and spray that. What I really like with the neoprene is that opposed to using something like Plastidip or the Rust-Oleum's rubber Plastidip that's comparable, is the neoprene sandable, whereas something like Plastidip's kind of sandable, but not really. So it allows you to achieve a much smoother finish and to get more of our flexible chromes and metallics out of the cheaper budget price point. Once that's on, you dry it, you paint it, and you call it a day. From the basic surface preparation techniques, pretty much everything else that we're going to talk about is applicable to all the mediums in some form or fashion, which is really sweet. Same thing with leathers, more applicable to the textile side of the world. Make sure stuff's clean. Depending on the leather that you're working with, you typically want to apply a neat's foot oil first, just to moisturize it. As gross as it is to think about it, it is skin, so sometimes it's sitting around for a little bit, and just like our skin, if we don't take care of it, it dries, it cracks. So we want to make sure that this stuff is nice and nimble and moist to give us the durability and longevity that we want from a lot of these production props. So, damage and wear and tear. I typically will refer to these both as additive and subtractive damage and accumulation techniques. So what I mean by additive is when we're doing things like oxidation, rust buildup, kind of like the crazy weld pitting, things like that. You can see it a little better up there, kind of ish. Anything that is adding to your base material, even things like kind of like paint, blood splatter, some things that'll add additional depth from a positive aspect to the base that we're working on. With subtractive, just kind of as it sounds, it's when we're taking away material. So we're talking about blast marks, bullet holes, abrasion wear and tear, knife strikes, plasma-based energy effects, because plasma still has mass and it's going to hit you harder than a laser will, but that's a whole sci-fi nerd discussion. And just kind of silly little things like that. Any questions really quick? So with our subtractive techniques, we're mostly looking at abrasive-based tooling. We'll get our things like Dremel rotary. If you guys have a Dremel but don't have that little whip-looking boy, that's called their Flex Wand. It's a great tool because it negates that giant chunky bulk of trying to do precision work with the big, thick old rotary tool, and it's like 20 bucks, which is pretty great. So it allows you a much more agile application between the different mandrels that you're trying to use. Mandrels being like our sanding discs, our buffing discs, any kind of like edge or ceramic sharpening things. The main one is, I've got the old boy AC powered one. The drill press stand is nice, but it can be a little unwieldy sometimes. The old school 4-volt battery powered one is good for kind of like on-set stuff if you don't have any access to plug-in power. Milwaukee also has a new power inverter out that takes their M18 system that's absolutely fantastic. So that'll give you an option to use some of these rotary tools like that. Their M12 based rotary tool is also great. Other hand tools, power tools that I like, there's a company called David Union that specializes more in model making type tools. So it's very fine application, low vibration, mostly working at plastics, which a lot of stuff, that's the same stuff that we're working on too, be it prints, be it just basic cleanup, things like that. The red one right here, this is actually their hand little linear reciprocating sander. So it's the first one that I had ever seen that actually has mechanical movement to it. In the past, there's a company called Proxen that made one that just vibrates, and it was far less effective than this. So any kind of tight spaces that you're trying to sand, they've got different abrasive pads for it. If you have any like hand issues or like carpal tunnel or things like that, it's very low weight, very low to no vibration, which is pretty great. They also have their 600 series rotary tool, AC powered, but it's also very, very lightweight, no vibration. They've got a lot of really nice cutting, carving, rotary style bits in it. There's also a company called Fordham that makes some fantastic rotary tools. They're designed for jewelry work. So where the David Union stuff is made for plastics and model work, the David Union stuff's made for grinding and sculpting metals, anything from pewter to tin, titanium, precious gold, silvers, things like that. So it's a lot hardier tool, but it still maintains that same precision-based, no vibration, very comfortable to hold. But there's also a big price point difference as well. You can get the David Union and the Dremel tools for about $100 a pop, whereas the Fordham rotary setups can range anywhere from $500 to $2,000, depending on the control and the box that you're going with. It is a great investment. I'm always partial to buying a good tool once versus buying okay tools multiple times. And it's also just one of those things that'll make your life a lot easier if you're something that you're doing or want, or something that you're curious about and just really enjoy doing. A lot of the bits that I'll use for the rotary tools are just the classic sanding drums, the sanding flapper wheels. We've got some of our metal cutting discs that I'll kind of use for like scrapes and scratches and things like that. The very highly detailed thing right here is one of the kind of more round conical shaped grinding tools. So for just a little bit quick of a process, I'll either use like the sanding drums to go in and create larger bullet feathering, things like that. Go in sculpting like some larger stuff in harder plastics, and then you can go in with the grinding tools and soften all those edges out so they're not hard and sharp, because anything that causes impact is gonna be more rounded versus crazy and shattered, unless again you're trying to emulate things like tungsten that's just very brittle. So all that stuff, going back to the beginning, will apply into how we're doing all this kind of damage and things like that. And then some of the just little hand tools is in the back here, we'll get some of our precision diamond files for a lot of, again, jewelry work, model making work. They're nice for causing little streaks and crashes, especially in some of our harder plastics. The various sanding strips are good to go on the fly because they're small, they're disposable, and they're cheap, which is fantastic. For a lot of our additive stuff, I'll use a lot of the same fillers that we use for our basic surface preparation. For a lot of the oxidation patterns and textures, there's a lot of different ways that you can do it. You can go through and add, like old school cinnamon was something that's been done in the past to give you some nice texture. Rock salt, regular salt. Something that I do often than not is use two-part body filler, which is the Evercoat brand, the polyester glazing putty that's up there. I personally prefer the Evercoat stuff more to like easily accessible Bondo and whatnot because it sets up faster, and I've also found it's a little more durable and also has a little better adhesive properties. So any automotive store and things like that carries a lot of this. If you're working with a more flexible material like a urethane rubber or even a foam sometimes, or even like some vac-formed ABS plastics, the Evercoat Polyflex that's kind of next to that has a lot of the same filling properties, but it's also got a little bendy to it. So you want to keep in mind any of these paints, primers, sealers and things like that. Make sure that they're paired correctly with the base material that you're popping everything on, because if you got a flexible base and you've got stuff on top of it that's not made to flex, it's going to crack and break the moment that everything gets put into motion or gets squished. That's why a lot of times folks will use like Rust-Oleum spray paints and whatnot on like EVA foam that's sealed with some of these rubbers. And you start getting like those spider web porcelain cracks on everything just because it's a dried hard enamel that's trying to flex and move and it can't. So with the additive stuff, what I'll usually do is if you take those two-part fillers and then cut it with acetone, you can alter the viscosity drastically. So either by sea sponge or stippling with acid brushes, chip brushes. I've even used the popsicle sticks to kind of drag it along for some more elongated effects. You can get different texture patterns. I don't want to walk around too much to anger the audio guys, but if you can kind of see it from here, you can see there's like some more lower profile, more rounded stippling. They can kind of settle down a little bit. You'll get more of the kind of sharper, tighter application. And all that is just from altering the viscosity with the acetone that we're mixing in. And that can gives us some nice subtle alteration to emulate a lot of the oxidation on various metals, things like that. Sea sponge is great because being organic, it's also very asymmetrical. So when you're stipling it on, you get a lot of that asymmetry that's popping through on the application. And then it's just a matter of taking the time to practice to acclimate yourself to the materials that you're working with, just like any other thing that we're doing. Sometimes this stuff will come quick, sometimes it's not. So if it's something that you've never done before, don't get frustrated, just keep at it, and then everything will click into place, and that's how we keep moving forward. With the two parts, there's also some occasions where I'll use some one-part body fillers. The examples I have up there are, again, the Evercoat which is great. It's pretty much just like the tuba Bondo with the familiar Bondo brown. You can also cut it with acetone, and then the 3M Acryl Green is another nice one. It's a little softer, but it's got some better adhesion properties to the Evercoat one part, I feel. You can also cut it with acetone. So again, just kind of be mindful of the application when you're popping stuff on there. The C-sponge is one of the main tools that I use for applying, in addition to the acid brushes and the chip brushes. These guys are a little more specialized for application. What this is a painting pen. It's kind of just like an old school little bucket with a little hole on the bottom, so you can put some very thin or low viscosity material in there and just kind of drag it and tap it on. And this is a ruling pen that it's kind of like a little long clamp that you can use for more thicker or viscous materials to drag and dry on for more precision application. I'll use it a lot for like liquid or latex masking techniques to get some nice fine application. One other quick thing that I mentioned before we move, or that I forgot to mention before we move forward from the subtractive techniques is paint chipping. So most of the times I'll do that with the liquid latex technique. It kind of falls into both worlds because there's two means to do the paint chipping. You can do essentially, like I'll get our metallic down, like the blue knee pad that went around. I'll get it based and then I'll apply the liquid latex mask to some of the dents and dings and scrapes and whatnot on there, and then just paint directly over it. And you can continue that step over and over and over and over again to organically create those different and organic looking chip textures. So with that side of the world, it falls solely to the subtractive technique, but you can kind of combine the two, and on that knee guard especially, there's the base metal underneath it, and then you can go through and then topically add the chipping colors with emulated primers, blacks, grays, and so on. That's a lot of how they did the damage on some of the Mandalorian armor, a lot of other old school techniques, and especially on camera with something that small, it still perceives pretty well. You just need to be mindful of the medium that you're working with, the viscosity of the paint, because all that stuff kind of applies differently and it'll layer differently. And then just with any of this stuff, be it the paint application, the damage effects, strike, impact, whatever, make sure that you keep things asymmetrical. Even like direct on impacts from bullets and whatnot, it will be close to symmetry, but just due to different factors in the density of the material from an identical object to the other, or the density of the bullet, slight variations in the impact angle, those changes will alter how that shock wave kind of blasts through that product, and it's gonna just be a little off when it comes to comparison. So when we're doing and trying to emulate organic stuff, damaged stuff, so on, asymmetry is the key for all of that, or else you start to kind of get these weird, what's the term? I'll think of it later, but it kind of throws things off place. Kind of like with like the weird realistic robots and whatnot. They're just they're almost real looking, but not quite. If any of you guys are 3D modeling, it's also a common thing that can happen, especially in ZBrush, because they've got the mirroring tools. So they go and sculpt one side and automatically mirrors. Everything is identically symmetrical. And unless you go in and manually just kind of tweak things off a little bit, you'll get that awkwardness. I'll probably think of the term in a week or so, and then I'll follow back up with you guys. Any questions on that stuff? Yeah.
Two quick questions.
Okay.
One in regards to the clothing and fabric. Which one would you find easier to do? So I was on 4400 as a background extra, and some people use makeup dirt and all of that, would you use makeup, paint, or actual dirt?
All three are applicable. And while we're here, I'll actually touch on that because I forgot to turn my head and look at this guy. A lot of this stuff, Mayron actually makes some really great dirt and like coal emulation makeup. It's great for both your face, but it's also great for your clothing and items and everything like that. With a lot of the blood techniques, you can use a lot of just the regular makeup-based bloods and whatnot because it stains and it still adheres well. There are two different kinds of paint style bloods that I like because they maintain that very wet look, but they don't maintain the messiness that is stage blood. So you can use those and splatter them on, you can spray them on. The old school like toothbrush or brush flick technique to get some different splattering effects. Sometimes I'll also kind of dip it on the end of like a painter's stick or a popsicle stick and just kind of like pull it back and flick it like I'm launching a paper football into somebody's face. And that'll give you some really high impact angles that you can alter and differ. The abrasion stuff, as far as like the wear and tear, is identical tools to this. Sometimes I'll also just like use a cheese grater as well to kind of get that because you've got a lot more flex to this material, so it's going to take a little more to wear it down. All of this stuff was done with the Dremel rotary tool and the sanding drums, and then I've also got a 5-inch orbital sander. Just be very careful with you're doing that. Anything that's rotary based, if you don't have this clamped and mounted well, it's going to get caught up in that rotary mechanism and suck everything up. You've got chances of damaging you. You've got chances of damaging your tool. You've got chances of just getting smacked in the face a lot. It's just be very, very mindful of that application. But stuff like my, like some of the Star Wars stuff, for as far as like emulation and dirt, it's a 100-year-old warehouse building where my studio is located, so I'll just take it and drag it on the floor. It's those things that give you some very nice, real and organic textures. And then there's also a lot of just generic pigments and things like that. Fuller's Earth is an old school product that's been used for a while for like some nice dusting techniques. It's just a ground up clay powder, and you can throw it in a sock or like a cheesecloth and just kind of dab it on stuff, and you get some really nice natural dust accumulation. So yeah, any generic paint pigments and things work great for that as well. If you're getting attacked by a weird glitter monster, you can just throw some mica powder on there and call it a day. Yeah, it's makeup works, the paint stuff works, the textile-based fabric paint works. For a lot of this stuff too, I'll take, for a lot of that kind of gross, grimy, organic nastiness, you can take like some nice ochre yellows, raw umber browns, even like some like saturated greens, just like basic acrylic paint. Mix it up in just like some distilled water in a spray bottle, and then you can just spray it and mist it with the nice yellows and like some of the greens. You get some cool looking pit stain grossness, and just continue to build it up and get your layers going. So again, there's more than one way to do all this stuff. It's just a matter of playing around, seeing what you like, what works for you, what works best for the production. And with any of that, especially when we're working with particulates and things, make sure that you guys use proper PPE. Particulate mask, gloves, eyewear. If you're doing any catalyzed things, make sure you're in a well-ventilated area, even some of the one-part body fillers and things like that. As artists, creatives, business folks, the best tool that we have is us. And if we don't take care of us, then we can't do the fun stuff. So make sure, first and foremost, that you take care of this thing, this organic biomass of frustration. And secondly, just have fun. Go out, practice. None of this stuff is going to come to you with one single go-ahead. If it does, let me know your secret and give me the sweet juju Kool-Aid that you're drinking. But it's just a lot of fun, a lot of craziness, and a lot of easy subtleties that we can do to build up and add different oxidations, make plastics looks real, add just that extra bit of realism and storytelling to our props, our costumes, and our set designs. Thank you all for being here. I know it was an early one and it's a little toasty in here. All of my contact information is up on the screen. We've also got the hands-on demo up in 4 and 2 that is immediately after this. And we are back in the corner of the bigger exhibit hall in the booth B005 spot with the lights and the 3D printer and stuff. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out. I know we'll also be doing some future master classes in our space, coordinated with DePaul University, and I'm sure Ned will want to do some more as well. Go make some weird stuff. Have fun. Thank you guys so very much. Appreciate you being here.